Well, here we are again in downtown Newcastle to do our look back on the cinema of 2016, a building which is mere feet away from a shooting location of one of the most talked about films of the year, which is I, Daniel Blake, which was the job centre is literally, what, 200 metres, 200 yards from where we're sitting now?
200 yards down, not 200 yards that way.
And across. Winner of the Palme d'Or and the most talked about and ballyhooed and big important film to be made in Newcastle since Get Carter, Stormy Monday. Anyway, there aren't that many big films made in Newcastle. There's never been a Geordie film winning the Palme d'Or. And it would be nice to sit here and celebrate the film as one of the year's best. What did you think of I, Daniel Blake, Michael? Let's.
Oh, Jesus, I didn't know you were going to open it like that. I thought you were going to build up to Daniel Blake.
Is it going to be in your top 10 of the year? Because I think you've actually seen eight new films in the cinema.
I've seen marginally a few more than that.
But how many films would you have to see for Daniel Blake to be in the top 5?
5. Yeah.
Right.
And needless to say, I've seen more than 5 films this year. No, Daniel Blake won't be among my favourites this year, let's say. It's a job centre in the film. In real life, it's actually a Newcastle building society.
Is that why you don't like it? Because
that's exactly why I don't like it. Just it's not true to the real life locales of Newcastle and Tyneside. To be honest, at some point that not to that sort of anal degree, but locations do come into it, and the sort of eventually. But I think before that, I must say I didn't like the film at all. I thought I was in trouble very early on in the film. I didn't have the displeasure of seeing it at Cannes Film Festival. I had to wait to see it with the mere mortals in the paying public, and did so I think about 2 weeks ago with my dad. Saw it in a cinema around the corner here. So
you've been exposed to sort of basically 6 months of talk about this film, and it's
not all of it's been positive.
Yeah, but as critics, it is hard to go in with an open mind. You know, you hear something's a masterpiece, it's an amazing film, or you hear something's terrible. Yes, in an ideal world, you go in and you see the film with completely fresh eyes, but
I'm not sure if that's even possible. I don't know. It's not something that I aspire to, certainly. And I wanted to like it on the one hand, because the likes of Camilla Long and Davy Jenkins had sort of given it kind of dismissals, and to name two critics from positive ends of the, let's say, liberal spectrum, and I also wanted to dislike it because of the praise that it had gotten from other critics whose opinion we can't trust, and I went into it strongly suspicious that I wouldn't like it, firstly because I thought The Spirit of 45 was dreadful, which was the last film by Loach that I saw.
You've seen every film that Ken Loach has done.
Every single film that Ken Loach has done, and TV work, except Jimmy's Hall, which I remember you referring to as a statement of embalmed socialism when it came out at the time. And it's very difficult to sort of frame a negative opinion about Daniel Blake without coming across as some sort of harsh, fascistic personality.
Because it's possible to be very happy that the film is in multiplex cinemas.
Yeah.
Very happy that the film has won Ken Loach's second Palme d'Or. Very happy that the film is a major element in the cultural, political conversation of 2016. Very happy that the issues that are raised by the film, like Cathy Come Home, like other Ken Loach films, the film has made a social difference, it has made a social impact. It is possible to believe all of those things and to be happy that the film is a phenomenon, and yet to not think that the film is particularly a good film.
Yeah, I thought the film was pretty piss weak, to be honest. Paul Laverty's script, I thought, takes liberties, cuts dramatic corners. Paul Liberty. And it's been like a growing problem among Loach's naysayers that as soon as this collaboration was began, Loach's career began to decline. I'm not sure the extent to which I agree with that, to be honest.
Paul Laverty, who I personally have a pretty low opinion of, did write The Wind That Shakes the Barley, which is a film that I know that you're a huge fan of. So it's not that everything that Laverty touches turns to crud. I mean, it's not that he's an untalented writer, but there's something personally, I mean, I think the fact that Loach has made, you know, what is it now, 14, 15, 16 films with this one writer, obviously he feels he's got a working relationship with this person. But as you say, I think there's a reliance on melodrama. To me, the characters are two-dimensional. I didn't quite buy any of it, all the situations.
I think they sort of take the virtuousness of their script and central characters as a kind of base default that gets them by any sort of respect to or any responsibility, sorry, to any kind of believable drama. And you know, the best review I've read of it is from our friend and colleague Julian Allen for Reverse Shot, who said, you know, as soon as it's impossible to say that this film is implausible without at least referencing the fact that what happens in the film is happening to, you know, many people in Britain at the moment. And you've got somebody like Jason Wood, who I've never heard of, writing a snippet, like a pull quote, in the Sight and Sound Films of the Year issue, which is just released this week, saying that, you know, it's a great picture of post-Brexit austerity or post-Brexit Britain, whatever that's meant to mean, when about a film that was conceived before the Brexit vote. And it's we're not even in post-Brexit Britain. What does that even mean?
And won the Palme d'Or before the vote.
Of course. And that's not to say that it doesn't speak to a general horrid situation in Britain and beyond that's unfolding this year. But I think, you know, as I said, that is not enough for me to make it a good film. It cuts corners. I mean, like, I just thought, like, there's so many elements of the film that don't ring true, and it may be the fact that I have an intimacy with the local landscape, where I'm able to see geographically, visually, whatever else, even in terms of accents, that it doesn't really, you can see that they did the minimal level of research required of making a film that will speak of importance and significance without actually paying attention to the actual depth of and feelings of the script at hand. That I think my biggest problem was the fact that, you know, let's say a fifth of the film, maybe more than that, takes place in the actual job centre, and you know, it's kind of a cartoonish depiction of a job centre. I'm presuming from this film alone that neither Laverty nor Loach has ever signed on or worked in a job centre, and you know, the grimness of that experience is grim, not because everyone's a cartoon fascist, but in spite of the fact that people are mostly okay.
Because there is the one nice, there is the one nice woman. There's the nice Anne and the demonic
Anne, who ends up
demonic Sheila.
Anne, who ends up, spoiler alert, attending Daniel Blake's funeral at the very end. Now, you know, you think back to somebody like Jim Allen, the Trotskyist scriptwriter with whom Loach was making films in the early 90s, as late as that, and Jim Allen would never have felt the need in the final statement of the film, the literal statement, almost to camera in the film, where Katie Haley Squires reads out his kind of parting statement at his funeral, would never have felt the need to incorporate into that, like, statement the fact that the character is a paragon of virtue who's never missed a bill or payment in his life. What happens if he had? You know, we don't need. Yeah, it's the deserving poor. Yeah. It kind of undoes their argument, and I guess, you know, you can say that a film like this doesn't need a nuanced argument. Well, actually, no, I think it does, because I think it's contributing to this debased, uncritical culture.
But if it had, if the film was better, it wouldn't have done so well. Runs a line that it's an accessible film about kind of relatively simplistically drawn characters. And if it was a, I don't know, Robert Gadigian's Vyagintsev type film, it would be at the Tyneside Cinema, and it might get one or two other places, but the chances of it getting into a multiplex are remote, and the chances of it becoming a cultural talking point. So in a way, you could argue that the film kind of waters down, because Loach is capable of making outstanding work.
Absolutely.
And Laverty is capable of writing a good script. And it's like, here, is there a trade-off that if they have this level of success and visibility, there has to be a trade-off that they can't do their normal thing? I mean, I don't agree with that, but I can sort of see that as a potential argument. Like, you know, I mean, I think in 20 years' time, as a film, I can't imagine anybody watching it and talking about it. at the minute, yes, it's one of the films of the year, but like, you know, Time magazine have just announced that Donald Trump is man of the year. Doesn't mean he's the best man of the year.
I mean, like, you know, like a load of people are going to see it, great. A load of people also went to see Billy Elliot. So I don't see now that is kind of a criterion of success in my eyes, artistic or otherwise.
Well, yeah, but if a lot of people go and see it, and then it creates political pressure, and then it makes change at the level of the government, and obviously we have a
it's very, very difficult to quantify that.
But yeah, but it's like we're sitting here as film critics, and I mean, I'm not a fan of the film. I think it's kind of...
You liked it more than I did.
I liked it more than you do, which isn't very hard. We both agree that Hayley Squires is terrific.
She's really standout performance.
And a real find.
This is the worst film I've sobbed at in the cinema, or ever, because I didn't see the other film in the cinema. But this is the second worst film I've ever seen that I've cried at, other than Finding Neverland.
But what proportion of films do you cry?
Well, I'm not like Robbie Collin. I'm not like Robbie Collin who cries at everything. No, the simpering awe with which this film is like sort of being received, and I was like going in thinking, oh well, I'm gonna cry at this perhaps, and I did. I cried at the that go-to emotional scene in the
job centre, in the food bank,
where she's starving, she's totally famished, opens a tin of beans and starts scooping it out of her mouth, feet away in the same shot. Bananas. There's a pool, there's a whole table of fruit. Bananas among them. Yeah. And
well, I'm
it's
a banana fan, but I've been reaching for the bananas.
That's what I mean. They sort of got carried away with the message there without actually, making it a believable experience.
But you do have the lovely women from the food bank who are obviously
played by the real
people.
Of course, and that's the point at which I started to, swell up my, because there is a genuine generosity there that comes through despite any other limitations in that scene. But I mean, like, the accent is all over the place by Dave Johns, who's apparently a local stand-up.
But I think he has been based in the south of England for quite a while, and
so he's a class traitor.
Particularly in the second half of the film. I mean, my accent has obviously changed over the years, but I could hear his A's because the character's Katie. And it was just like little things, but anyway, this is not meant to be.
Katie's middle-class daughter Daisy, right? When he's going, get away, Daisy. Sounds like Stan Laurel. Sounds like Alan Shearer doing a Stan Laurel impersonation.
John Hall.
Just all over the place, and it's like.
But does it matter? Does it matter? Like Billy Elliot.
No, of course it doesn't matter really. But I thought it was indicative.
His brother's from Sheffield. He's meant to be from Durham.
Of course, but they've chosen to shoot a film up here, right? They've chosen to use local non-actors. They've chosen the general sort of backdrop and landscape, which is a very beautiful landscape, of Newcastle and the surrounding areas. Actually, I think, all this garbage in the critical discourse that we've been been subjected to since Cannes, who says this is an important film but not an artless one. I think it actually gets it the wrong way around, because I thought visually it looked very nice indeed. Robbie Ryan, I think, is a cinematographer. I think it was shot in film. And Loach is, again, relying on his distanced cinematography, in which he gives cameras the physical room in which to actually, spatially have full bodily expression, which I think is a virtue. And there's a lot to like in terms of that. I mean, there's that scene where he's walking down Grey Street, so you get all the Georgian architecture and stuff like that.
Which is very, it's very fleetingly used. It's not exactly.
No, it's not
Stormy Monday where you get it looks like Chicago.
And this again is to be taken as a strength of the film, I think. But I thought none of these things are in themselves massive points, but taken together, right, as a kind of gestalt, I think it's indicative of poor research and under research. Like that scene when she's walking out the shop when she's like, she needs some tampons and she's gone out the shop and she gets stopped before she's left the premises. Now that doesn't happen. It can't happen. You legally cannot be confronted or challenged until you've left the premises. And then the guy who stops her, Ivan. Listen, I'm dead sorry, right? I'm dead sorry about that. When he ends up helping her. And she, you've got that horrible subplot in which she's, becomes an escort, and her character stops becoming a character because we all see it through Daniel Blake's perspective.
I mean, the thing is that I've talked to people and they don't like to say that they don't like the film, because it's like, to criticize, as you say, to criticize the films, to criticize the working classes, to criticize people who are having a go at the government, you know, and it's like, I've spoken to several people, it's like, oh, are we allowed to say that we don't like the film? And it's like, you know, as soon as it won the Palme d'Or, it was on this sort of guaranteed thing, and yes, I was very surprised that it got in multiplexes, that it's had the level of success that it had, but it has got to the point where people are saying to me, oh, I didn't like the film, but I better not say anything. Or even like if you look at people on Twitter or Facebook, as soon as anybody says anything negative about the film, what do you know about this sort of thing? But as I say, this is not a chat entirely about I, Daniel Blake, because there are other films. Should we move on to some ones that we like?
If you wish.
Well, last year we were sitting here and you'd seen Spotlight and I hadn't.
Yeah, I'd seen it around three times at that point.
So I've now seen Spotlight 4 times, and it is the best film that was released in Britain this year. It was released in January.
Which is an opinion I would agree with.
January or February, wasn't it?
It's the first film I watched this year. It was my 4th viewing also. And yeah, I mean, it still endures for me. It's still the best feature film to have been released, as you said, in UK cinemas this year. And it happily won the Oscars. The Best Picture Oscar, sorry.
Best Picture. It only won 2 Oscars, which was the first Oscar and the last Oscar, which I think was Screenplay and Best Picture.
Okay.
And in between it was like, oh, The Revenant's going to do it, and all that kind of thing. And I actually quite like The Revenant as well, even though it's not a
I saw Spotlight, The Revenant. No, sorry, no. I saw The Revenant on the same day as I saw
Creed.
Hateful Eight. Hateful Eight.
Right.
And then Creed. I saw 3 films in one day in January last year. And Creed, I think, was the last film that I mentioned on last year's yearly roundup, because you said to me, what films are you looking forward to in 2016? My mind drew a blank and I could only think of Creed, because a lot of people by that point had already seen it.
And I was like, what?
And it was coming out like a week later.
Well, again, there was a lot of hype in America. A lot of critics were going on and on about Creed, which, for people who've maybe forgotten, since it's a long time ago since the film came out, Ryan Coogler's followed to Fruitvale, starring Michael D. Johnson, I think his name is.
Yeah.
And it's the continuation of the Rocky legacy, Rocky franchise, Rocky thing. Like years later, Rocky's now a coach. The son of Apollo Creed wants to become a boxer. Various things happen. And I'd read all these reviews, and I was like, I'd seen Fruitvale Station, as it's also known, and I was like, nah, I'm going to sit on the edge of this one, because I'm probably going to walk out. And like the first 20 minutes of the film, I was like, yeah, it's a bad TV movie. All of these idiotic critics praising it to the skies because it's dealing with racial themes and all that sort of stuff, and it's getting a free pass. And then there's the first boxing match, which is all done in one shot, all done in one take. And I was riveted by that. I thought it was fantastically well done, and I was like, oh, something's going on here. And it just built and built and built and built and built and built. And by the end, I was in tears. I was in the ring with Creed Jr. And it was like a proper old-fashioned movie experience that I'd been put through an emotional ringer.
And what is it that kind of prompts that? What does Creed do as a boxing picture in particular for you that makes it such an emotional experience?
Well, I think partly it's because you know the characters from all these other films. Partly because it uses the stuff, the Apollo Creed footage in a very kind of fleeting and touching.
It's kind of sparing, right?
It just gives the development of it. It hits all the right marks at just the right point emotionally. And yes, obviously you're aware you're being manipulated. You're aware you're being dragged along by this Hollywood experience. But I came out of it and I saw it at the lunchtime screening, first screening of the day at 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
And I was seeing The Revenant that night, and I was just like, oh, am I going to be in a fit state to watch Leonardo DiCaprio, wrestling with a bear, having seen Creed? And Creed is definitely in my top 10 of the year, top 5 of the year probably. And also for you, would it still be up there?
Not quite, but only because we've had a full year between.
A full year of heavy film watching schedules.
I did like it at the time. Was carried away with it to the same degree that you were, I think. Since then, I've kind of become a little wary of it. But if I may play devil's advocate for a moment, beneath all of the sort of feel-good aura of the film, which I think it achieves very well, isn't it about a guy, a young lad,
Rich.
yeah, who kind of is a bit upset because he's not being taken very seriously.
But then he turns out to be a really good boxer.
Yeah.
And he trains himself up, and yes, it stretches credulity, but we're talking about the Rocky films here. This is not some, Loachian realism film about a boxer. That was that Jim Sheridan one with Daniel Day-Lewis called The Boxer.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to be suckered into the Hollywood nonsense, and yes, there are questionable aspects about the film and cheering the rich boxer who wants to take on, going to the ghetto and doing all that sort of thing. And yeah, maybe it's not a film that I'm going to rewatch many times, but I think every time I watch that film, I think it will always work. And I think because it is so, I'm not saying he deliberately made it like a crappy TV movie with horrible music at the beginning, but I was certainly suckered into. I was actually thinking, I might actually walk out of this because it's not going to get any better. And as I say, just as I was starting to really look at my watch, that fantastically well edited, I think Maurice Alberti is the cinematographer and camera operator. Really, just at that point, I was like, well, I'm definitely not walking out of this. But how many new release films have you seen this year? And is it, the impression I get is that it's a lot less than in previous years for you?
Consciously so.
Right.
Yeah, I wanted to spend less time being annoyed at films, so I decided to watch less. I also missed a couple of key film festivals this year that would have allowed me to catch up with the Cannes Fair, such as Novo Horizonte in Wrocław, which I wasn't invited to this year. That's the festival at which I would have caught up with the likes of Tony Erdmann and whatever else, Sierra Nevada and stuff like that.
It's not the end of the world.
That's right.
It's not the end of the world that you didn't know. Elle by Paul Verhoeven, which neither of us have seen.
No. And then, of course, I couldn't make the Biennale due to other commitments. So that it was. I feel like there are films that I should be catching up with. I'm not in any hurry to catch up with the likes of Nocturnal Animals, for instance. The best new feature-length film I've seen this year was the Romanian film Scarred Hearts by Radu Juda. Whose Afarim I know that you like.
Afarim is in my top 10 of the year, which was
of releases,
because it finally got released this year, but it got a
very minimal release within London circles.
Yeah, it didn't really get released, but it technically it was shown in a cinema for a week, and therefore it got a release. He's done another film since then.
Yeah.
Another one of mine in my top 10 is Terrence Malick's Knight of Cups, which didn't really get released either. Technically it did. And this ties in with something that I was going to mention about the Sight and Sound poll, which came out this week. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, this is silly critics picking films that we haven't had the chance to see yet.
Critics being out of touch because all of the top 10 films, or most of them,
the top 10
haven't actually been released in the UK.
So the number one by a long margin was Tony Erdmann, which comes out in like April or something like that. Well, to me, yes, there is an aspect of that, but I think it's also the fact that why is it taking a year or 8 months for Tony Erdmann to get into a British cinema?
It's a silly. Well, I heard, and I can't verify this at all, that Daniel Blake had a release date set way earlier than it was released in the UK, and then when it won the Palme d'Or, what happens? It gets knocked back, and distributors think we can actually pour some money into this and get a proper campaign going. So it's kind of a cynical opportunism there going, I think.
But Tony Erdmann
was
released in many European countries already.
Debased, if not defunct, distribution and exhibition system.
But it's also crazy because Rogue One is released in the Star Wars film next week, is released everywhere on the same day. All the big Hollywood films. It used to be when I was little, you would hear about Jaws, and we'd get it like a year later. It took months and months for the big Hollywood films to come. And now, it's like they're all on the same time because of piracy and that kind of thing.
So if it's getting released the same day worldwide, presumably its press screenings will also be
nobody's
seen
it. Yeah, nobody's seen Rogue One.
So at least we'll have a British contributor to Sight and Sound, the international film magazine, actually reviewing the film. As opposed to somebody from the New York circles who seem to get first dibs.
I think these days we have to extend a hand of friendship to our American friends.
No, on the one hand,
hour of need.
On the one hand, Sight and Sound is branded as the international film magazine. So I would speak in its defence when it comes to the fact that a lot of the films haven't been released in the UK yet because it's got an international readership, an international scope. You know, why should it cater to just one circuit, one commercial circuit? On the other hand,
it is a distribution. It's the issue is not Sight and Sound's policy or the critics. The issue is the distributors.
Of course. So it's indicative of a complete defunct system. On the other hand, Sight and Sound is the BFI's critical arm, and they do make a point of reviewing nothing in their, you know, in an otherwise predictable fetish for relevance. They review nothing but the UK releases each month.
Because that's monthly film bulletin.
Yes.
Which used to, as you know, it used to be a separate magazine, which I think in the 80s they merged them into one thing, and so Sight and Sound, as part of its remit, has to still be the monthly film bulletin. So that's there as a reference, which maybe explains why the editors are very keen to emphasise the international angle, because part of it is that parochial thing where they have to review the Keith Lemon film, which I don't think anybody outside Britain is going to know or care about.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I look at my top 10 films of this year or the top 20 films, most of the good ones were from last year, and you know, I'm sitting here now and like I haven't seen Elle, I haven't seen a lot of the films which American Honey, for instance, I haven't seen, which I'm sure is going to. I'm sure it's going to
hurry to it. It has been released, hasn't it?
Hasn't it? All right, okay. Maybe that's one that I missed out on. But again, it's very hard to kind of keep track of what's coming out.
But this is the question that I was kind of lead into is, you know, to what extent should critics be compelled to, you know, keep like audiences in mind, and like, you know, because I know that you fastidiously keep lists of not only world premieres this year but films that have been released. Now, a lot of, like, you know, the salaried journalists among us whose like kind of work routine is dictated by weekly releases, right? Do a whole year of that, you know. I'm so pleased I'm not obliged to see the dreck that they must have to kind of sift through each week. But if you have a whole year of that and you're not keeping, you know, an up-to-date tally of what was released when, then of course when you're asked the best films of the year, you're obviously going to revert back to, you know, that special week that you had in Cannes, regardless of whether or not the films you saw there have been released, right? Yeah,
and also like something like Tony Erdmann, which I think is a good film. Don't get me wrong, it's a good film. But the way that it was written, the way that it was talked about at that screening in Cannes, as if it was like, oh, this is obviously going to be a masterpiece for all time, which everybody's going to talk about, you know, forever. I mean, you know, you see the film and it's good, but I think that the thing with Tony Erdmann, and I don't want to talk too much about Tony Erdmann because that's one that a lot of people haven't seen yet. It's because it's a comedy that it's like a long, good comedy. And how many art house international comedies do we get? I mean, like Almodovar does comedies occasionally, but this one is like a laugh out loud art movie. And everybody's like, oh my God, art film can be funny as well. And it's like, well, yeah, and it's just because like this slow cinema, if a film is slow and miserable and long, it is taken seriously. And if it's got a bit of dry humour in it, or something like Albert Serra, oh, how we laughed, or Miguel Gomez or something like that, it's like, oh, this is a nice thing. But to actually be able to say, oh, here is a German 3-hour comedy, of course, a film which got no prizes, whatever, from the capricious Cannes jury, which went for other things. But yeah, I mean, it's frustrating in some ways, but on the other hand, you know, when the film finally comes out, hopefully people will go and see it, because it is definitely one to be seen. But when I look down at the kind of the new films that got released, which I saw this year for the first time, my number one film, if I applied those criteria, is Pete's Dragon. So, what's
Pete's Dragon?
Pete's Dragon is a remake of a 70s Disney film. In the original film, the dragon was a cartoon. Now it's CGI. A kid gets lost in the woods when his parents are killed in a traumatic car crash at the beginning of the film. He is brought up, he meets a dragon who basically brings him up, and for several years he lives in this idyllic forest somewhere in Oregon or somewhere with this dragon. At a certain point, the existence of the kid is discovered by the local people, and therefore the existence of the dragon is discovered by the local people, and the idyllic existence of the kid and the dragon has to come to an end, because obviously the kid can't stay living in the woods.
Is this an actual film?
This is an actual film.
Where did you see it?
I saw it at in Vienna, right? But it was on.
Oh,
it was on wide release.
It's set in Oregon.
It was on. It was
Kelly
in.
Reichardt.
It was in wide release in multiplexes all over the world. Robert Redford plays a twinkly old fart.
dragon.
He's the voice of the dragon. He plays this twinkly old fart who does a lot of woodwork, so him and Daniel Blake would be very good friends.
Is his toolbox better than Daniel Blake's?
His toolbox is much more 21st century than Daniel Blake's, all lasers and stuff.
Because Daniel Blake's, what was it I said to you?
Catherine Cookson.
21st century carpenter with a toolbox from Catherine Cookson.
But the thing with Pete's Dragon is, it was directed by David Lowery, whose previous film was, I think I'm right in saying, Ain't Them Body Saints, which was one of these highly rated American independent films, which was at Cannes Critics Week with Rooney Mara and Casey Affleck, blah, blah. And it was like, oh, he's now going to do a children's film for either Disney or some big studio. And it was like, oh, what's going on here? Mm-hmm. So it actually had very good reviews. And I was a little bit suspicious of this. I was like, oh, wait, it's Pete's Dragon. How good can it be? And by the end of the film, I was like, yes.
So you wouldn't have seen it had anyone else, like, you know, if it just come from like the Pixar factory, you might not have seen it.
No, I wouldn't have.
But I didn't think you did cartoons.
No, I wouldn't have. But it's not all cartoon. It's like Robert Redford is not a cartoon. It's not CGI.
I think you'll find that Robert Redford is a cartoon. Does he have more dialogue in this?
His hair is CGI.
Does he have more dialogue in this than he does in All Is Lost?
Well, let's see. There's less swearing in this one.
Right.
I'm happy to say for the audience. But if I had to pick a new film of this year, and as I say, it wouldn't be the normal thing I would go and see, blah, 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 but I was completely won over by it. It probably helped by the fact that I went to see the original when I was 6.
Right.
So it pushed a lot of emotional buttons. But I thought it was an extremely well-made, genuinely touching, fantastic use of computer-generated imagery. The dragon is just wonderful. Even the kid's great, and often in these films, the kid is the sort of sticking point. Mm. So yeah, like, you know, my new film of the year, because I can't have Spotlight, because that was like a last year film officially, and I can't have all the other ones, Afarim, Creed, and all that sort of stuff. So last year.
But that's a 2016 production.
Of a 2016 production, which release. I saw this year, blah blah, and you know, I would go Pete's Dragon, and then like.
But premiered in uncertain regard.
At the second level, there'd be like, I would have films like The Accountant, Ben Affleck. I would probably even have like Batman versus Superman in there as like.
Which I haven't even seen in English.
Which I saw dubbed.
You didn't see in English.
I saw it dubbed into Spanish, and mi habla español muy bien, so I understood. I got the gist of what they were talking about, and there was one gag that I got where Superman saves Batman's mother or vice versa. And he says to her, I am the amigo of your son. And she says, yes, because you both wear capes. And so I was like laughing at this joke in Spanish. So I thought I was, you know, who needs Brexit when you can laugh at jokes in Spanish? But the great benefit of watching Batman versus Superman dubbed in Spanish, which I would strongly recommend, is that you don't hear the voice of Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. Because many of the reviews didn't do his own dub. And there are many of the reviews said that the most unbearable whining fingernails on blackboard voice of Jesse Eisenberg. So you don't get that, but you also don't get Lawrence Fishburne, you don't get Jeremy Irons, you don't get all this sort of thing. But it's actually, from what I could see, it looked like if we must have superhero films, have them like this. This film's like a Hodorowski. It's hallucinogenic.
Armand White in his
First name terms with Armand.
Yeah, as our friend Armand said, in his little snippet contribution to Sight and Sound's Films of the Year, lists it among his 5. Says that the director, Snyder, is like, you know, among one of the visionary.
He's visionary. It's on the poster. It's not just from the director's.
But I mean, a visionary should be a neutral term, right? It's possible to be a visionary and also a terrible filmmaker.
Yeah, most visionaries in the old days were blind, you know, so that's not much use for that. But yeah, I went in. I was in Mexico. Went to the cinema to see Batman versus Superman, and I've got to say, I thought it was. It took more risks. It pushed more boundaries.
Who wins?
The audience wins because it's a good film. Oh. Well, who wins? Batman wins, because Ben Affleck's a bigger star than Henry Cavill, and he's a 10 times better actor and a 50 times better director.
So, which brings us to The Accountant,
which brings us to The Accountant, which he is in. It is the kind of flip side of Batman. It's about an accountant with a gun who he has autism, pretty severe autism.
It sounds like a Paul Laverty script.
He is basically celibate. Never had a girlfriend.
It's definitely a Paul Laverty script.
Never had a girlfriend, but he's also a bookkeeper for international drug cartels. Right. And he was brought up by a very cruel, sadistic father who made him learn a Indonesian martial art called Penjilat, or sort of Penjilet. He makes him learn the martial art Penjilet, so he's got all these skills. And I watched the film, and it's got J.K. Simmons as this cop, and Anna Kendrick's girlfriend, John Lithgow as this villainous figure, and it's like 4 different. John Bernthal, one of our best character actors, it's like 4 different films put together, and like the script is just like so lumpy and bizarre and weird. And it was one of these where I was watching and thinking, this film, it's just some Hollywood nonsense.
Yeah.
And again, like Creed, it just gets better and better and better and better and better. And by the end of it, I was like, I want another film with Ben Affleck playing Christian Wolff, who is the accountant. The only thing it doesn't have is him shooting somebody twice and say, double entry motherfucker. But, you know, apart because he probably wouldn't swear. But but it was one when I came out of the cinema and I was texting people. I was like, quick, before this goes, it was actually did pretty well at the box office. But like, don't miss this one. This is a good one. And of course, Ben's now got his new directing film, Live by Night, which was an Oscar-tipped thing, and then people saw it last week, and all of a sudden it sort of disappeared into the ether, which might mean that it's a good film. Because, you know, he's directed 3 films now, Argo being the last one. Trailer makes it look like Miller's Crossing meets Who Framed Roger Rabbit, basically.
What did you think of that film with his brother in Manchester by the Sea? Lonergan.
As a huge fan of Kenneth Lonergan's first 2 films, I was hugely stoked to see this one.
That's a damning preface, isn't it?
It is a damning preface. Margaret, and You Can Count on Me. And this one was, I think Mr. Lonergan's been reading his reviews. He's been reading about how he's a great dramatist and a great figure in world cinema. I mean, Margaret was barely got released. It had this horrible post-production. Critics got behind it and saved it, and it became like it got released everywhere. And this one, as I say, it's like he's read every one of his reviews, and he sat down to write the script from the great American scriptwriter. And of course, it's tipped for all the Oscars, and Casey Affleck's tipped to win Best Actor. And I would say it is not fit to tie the shoelaces of Creed or Pete's Dragon or Knight of Cups or anything like that. To me, it was constipated. So I would not say in 2017 when are you planning to go and see more films next year? Is this the last ever?
This is the end of my year-long experiment.
Partycrashers.
No.
Because you've been watching a lot of short films, like in your top 10 of the year. I did a little bit of research on this. 5 years ago, you had no shorts. 4 years ago, you had like 1 or 2, and then it's more and more. And now the majority of your top 10 is short films.
Yeah, but I've been watching more shorts.
Which it's not much use for this because
most of them are experimental,
and it's very hard to see them, most of them, because short films don't get a crack in the whip.
Yeah.
The one film which would be both in your top 10 and in my top 10 is No Eye by Aline Magrez. So I don't, we probably shouldn't be talking too much about short films too much in this context. But if people do get the chance to see that one, which we agree is one of the best films of the year, it is about. Do you want to briefly summarise what it's about?
It's well, it's a 14-minute short. 14 minutes about a town in
Vietnam
called
Hanoi.
Yeah,
the capital. Quite a big town.
I've only seen it once. No, but it's about a very, very small community within that city, and
let's not say what's special about this community, because I watched the film and like halfway through something happens and you kind of go, oh, did I not realise?
But it's structured around the infrastructure of this community. The overhead cables, and it sees patterns from there that it's kind of associating with the sort of local ecologies and economies that kind of are adjoining one another in this situation, such as a textiles kind of shop floor.
And it is a structural film because it does one thing, then a certain thing happens, then it's a different film the second off, and we can't really say what that is. But on a broader basis, like, would you say that, I mean, it seems like an obvious thing for me to say is that people should see more short films. Yeah. It's like I paid to see 42 new films in cinemas this year, and like maybe 10 of them were worth the money, basically. Yeah. I mean, obviously I see a lot of films at festivals and all that kind of thing, but like when I look at a shorts program, there's normally 2 or 3 films that. And is it because of the length? Is it because like short films are generally as long as they have to be? Whereas even a Hollywood film is generally like, this is like, can you make a 90-minute, 2-hour film?
It's codified. I still think most shorts are too long, but when I say that, I have a particular kind of short in mind, i.e. a narrative fiction short that's probably been vetted, streamlined through
which
different
is also,
schemes.
in its way, like a commercial prospect, because a lot of people do them, like Whiplash, one of our very talked about films of the decade, which we both despised. Can't wait for La La Land, which is apparently even better than Whiplash. Yay! We should now dance out of the room. Apparently Ryan Gosling's dancing is now getting criticised. But anyway...
so that he can't act.
Whiplash, so short films can be stepping stones to careers, and people do these narrative short films. But an experimental short film or a documentary short film, you know, if it... there was one in Graz which was 15 seconds, Atlantic 35. For me, a short film's anything up to 49 minutes. That's a huge spectrum. But if you're making a commercial film, it's like you're stuck with this.
But of course, to even sort of be in a position to make shorts and also consume shorts, you have to be sort of inhabiting a certain cultural space, whether that's institutionalized in terms of a film practice in, you know, academia, or within other kind of different movements and collectives that have the sort of support, whether financial or otherwise, in which, you know, that kind of filmmaking can kind of be freed, if you like, to forgive the hippie term, you know, liberated from, you know, the constraints of a codified commercial outlet, and therefore, you know, becomes a kind of a means of artistic expression itself. So, you know, not only are, I think, 7 of my top 10 of the year shorts, they are also experimental shorts. You know,
and the number one is Illinois Parables?
Yeah, I mean, I don't class that as a short. You know, at 60 minutes, I think you could screen that to a paying public without showing something else.
I would not call it a short, but it's shorter than the average.
Of course, yeah.
Bear.
I mean, you know, Scarred Hearts is 150 minutes, which is a fiction feature.
But it justifies those 150 minutes.
Of course, it's a romance that unfolds in long shots and long takes, shadowy long shots and long takes. But no, I mean the top short, is it No I Now?
Isn't that Sarah Winchester number 2?
Yeah, Sarah Winchester Ghost dot rather Bertrand Bonello.
It's like 24 minutes.
Yeah, 24, 29 minutes.
And so, like, obviously people can go to film festivals and see these short films.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sort of retreat into my own irrelevance by singing the praises of films that no one's ever heard of or has even a means to see.
But do you think, like, do you think films that we're paying to see at the Tyneside at the multiplex are in a process of getting worse?
Because, I think so.
Or are we just getting older?
One thing I was going to ask you, because you're in a better position than me this year to say this, because you've continued spending money on Drek, right? On films that, you know, aren't really worth the time or money.
Hard-earned cash. I have spent.
And you make a point of this, I know.
The first film I saw this year was Joy. Terrible. Later that month I saw Youth, which you gave 1 out of 10.
Youth is absolutely terrible, man.
European Film Award Best Film. I would also include on the shit list Everybody Wants Some by Richard Linklater, which I thought was just dreadful. The Nice Guys. The Childhood of a Leader by Brady Corbett, which was exquisitely pretentious.
Oh, it was the opening film of Rotterdam, so you know more.
And Nocturnal Animals, which you've also mentioned, which I came out of that cinema staggered. I mean, it got the runner-up prize. I mean, it was the Venice jury said it was worse than the Lav Diaz film because it got the runner-up prize to Lav Diaz, which is worse. Yeah. The Lav Diaz film is obviously abysmally terrible, 4 hours of abysmally terrible. But Nocturnal Animals, this is a film which has had like pretty much universal praise from intelligent, sensible adult critics.
Seemingly, and
I'm utterly baffled because.
But my question is going to be,
why do I keep torturing myself?
No. Do you think there is a certain sort of a genuine decline, if we may speak in those terms? I don't want to frame this discussion, by the way, with like predictably tenuous politicization, like, you know, oh, we're living in the year of, you know, Trump's election and Brexit and whatnot. As some other sort of you know, prestigious critics spend their backwards to do. But
I think that
is there a genuine decline, or is it because it's a kind of viewing fatigue because you've just kind of saturated yourself in images this year?
No, because like yesterday I went to see Allied, which like is 2 hours and takes a while to get going. And by the end of the film, I was well into it, and I wouldn't say I was crying exactly, but you know, there was water collecting in my eyes.
There seems to be a certain shift of appraisal here, evaluation. The films that you're kind of responding to this year are fucking Pete's Dragon, Creed, Allied, you know, kind of old-fashioned Hollywood, unashamedly commercial films. So, for instance, films like Jim Jarmusch's Patterson, which I know you've seen, and I haven't.
I mean, I was stunned the other day because I went to see the new film by Jim Jarmusch and the new film by Clint Eastwood, Sully. And of the two of them, I mean, I wouldn't say Sully's a great masterpiece, but I definitely think Sully's a better film. I mean, I would put my hand on the Bible and swear to that. For me, it's a much better film. And like the idea that I would prefer a Clint Eastwood film over a Jim Jarmusch film, if you said me that 3 months ago, I'd have said that was laughable. But occasionally Jim Jarmusch lays an egg, and he's laid an egg this time.
But you know, it's a film.
Eastwood's
It's a film to which, again, seemingly otherwise, like sensible people have responded. People have even written poems in response to this film.
I can understand why Patterson will cast a nice quiet spell over you and all that kind of thing, but it left me annoyed, fuming at the whole thing.
Again, another film that got into his fight and sounds top down.
Yeah,
by the way,
I can understand why people would like Patterson. I'm baffled by anybody that likes Nocturnal Animals. I mean, I'm genuinely bemused. It's like a Lav Diaz thing. I do not see what is there.
But you've got to remember. And I don't like to be so repetitive and cynical about the mechanisms by which film criticism is practiced. But you've got to remember that most of the critics whose opinions are being quoted in the buzz and brouhaha surrounding these films have seen the films in a certain context alongside other critics in that sort of, it's become a cliched term, but within that sort of echo chamber of watching films at festivals, at prestigious festivals.
But look at Venice this year, like the first 3 or 4 days, it was La La Land, Arrival, Nocturnal Animals, something else. It was like
just one
masterpiece after the other.
Yeah.
And you were reading them thinking, oh God, I mean, I was actually at Venice Film Festival. I didn't get there till the second week, and then I didn't see any of these big films. I saw a couple of the competition films. But you're reading this and think, oh my God, Venice is dynamite this year, wow! And then you see the films and you kind of go,
It doesn't matter, does it? Like, none of that matters. It's
but are the films getting worse? I would say, yes, I think they are getting worse. And I don't think that's a surprise, because I think since 2008, the amount of risks that's being taken, the amount of entrenchment of the big studios, the big properties, sequels, franchises and all that crap is increasing, and exponentially increasing. And when something like Creed sneaks through, and Pete's Dragon, which is like, it is still possible. Hollywood gives you this the old Orson Welles thing about the train set. If you are David Lowery, you want to make another film with Rooney Mara or whoever it is, Greta Gerwig in Podunk, Alabama, and 6 people are going to watch it, fine. You can actually, it is still possible to be a Paul Verhoeven, or to be somebody that goes to Hollywood and grabs that and says, right, I'm now going to make a film. But then it relies on the producers, and it relies on a weird chain of things. Spotlight, is not a Hollywood film per se, but it's like, it won Best Picture at the Oscars. It's not some little marginal film here. And when they do come along, and I think they're coming along less often. I mean, like yesterday, Zemeckis is the director of Allied, who is like been proven to be a good director for 40 years.
Yeah.
You don't lose that. All right, script by Stephen Knight, who did Locke, and it can be up and down.
Yeah.
But in this one, it works. And it
should that film with Jason Statham?
Locke, Hummingbird, which is also very good. In fact, there's
cinematographer by Chris Menges, the Loach.
No, I mean Hummingbird, Jason Statham, fantastic film, and I would defend that. And Statham, who has got some big film coming up next year. What is it? He's got some big thing coming out next year. But anyway, when they emerge, they stand out more than.
But these things,
so it gives me hope.
These shifts and trends aren't overnight, either. Films aren't made overnight, as we know. I think what we're experiencing in general is the sort of prolonged effects of some kind of terrible cultural crisis.
And it's financial crisis,
it's manifesting itself
and it's
in cinema.
It's the old thing. Who gets to make films? You've got to go to a film school, you've got to go to the right film school, you go through a film festival catalogue, everybody's been to the right film school, blah, blah. How many of them have come from working class backgrounds? Diversity is a wonderful thing, gender diversity, race diversity, but it's not economic diversity.
Yeah.
And it's all very well if you got half the directors are men and half the directors are women.
Martin Scorsese's new film's all male, I heard. The Silence.
I think the fish are female.
Okay.
Liam Neeson's female, genetically female. I mean, maybe we should end by looking forward.
Nothing wrong with that.
Maybe we should. Nothing wrong with that. Maybe we should end by talking about a film that we haven't seen briefly. Silence, the trailer, which I've seen, makes it look promising.
Okay.
I've got to say, lots of.
Have you seen the first, the original? Because it is a remake, isn't it?
Is it?
Yeah.
What is the original?
I don't know. Of course it is, man.
Is it?
Yeah.
Of what?
I don't know. I haven't watched it.
Well, nothing like being a well-informed film critic in the 21st century. But are you going to break your vow of never watching any more films?
Oh, come on, it's not a vow.
To go and see Silence by Martin Scorsese. The heavyweight.
Of course I will.
The last man standing.
But you know, Scorsese sort of, you know, it doesn't matter what he makes, there's always that element of an event when you see his film. For better or worse. Usually worse these days. But you know, there is you feel an excitement.
I like
room,
Hugo,
you know?
I like The Aviator. I thought The Departed was kind of crap. That was one where I kind of staggered out of the cinema going, what the hell?
And you thought Wolf of Wall Street was terrible.
Oh God, Wolf of Wall Street. It gave me an abscess. I was watching the film and I had so much bile in my system. I started to have this. It was like a Cronenbergian thing. That was a 1 out of 10. I think that's the worst film by a major director.
You know what I'm thinking about doing next year, come January, scrapping ratings and lists. I've got an increasing idea that the work of...
But do you think Silence will be a 7 or an 8?
No, I've got a feeling that lists and ratings only reinforce the neoliberal mechanisms by which art is commercialised and commodified.
I entirely agree, and I wish I didn't watch a film going, is this a 16 out of 28 or a 17 out of 28, but, you know,
I think it's fine when it's sort of unashamedly personal to the degree that yours always are.
But it's like, you know, whenever you speak to a London critic, it's always like, oh, it started off as a bit of a 3-star, and then by the end it was like it's really a 4-star. Yeah. You know, and it's like, for me, the 5-star system is such a ridiculously blunt instrument, which is why I developed my 28-point system.
Yeah, the
patented system. So, yes or no, it sounds going to be
a 7 or an 8.
Is it going to be Wolf of Wall Street, Howler, or is it going to be back to Casino and Goodfellas and Mean Streets?
I think I will rate it among the aviators of his oeuvre, which for me isn't too high. Well,
luckily, you know, we won't have too long to wait, and our desperate longing to see another masterpiece on the big screen, because the last, what was it? I mean, would you say Spotlight's a masterpiece?
Yeah. I think its material sort of, and the performances sort of elevated.
It's a masterpiece.
Beyond the kind of quotidian.
Just a good picture.
Yeah.
Well, last year we started about nothing but Spotlight. This year Daniel Blake, and then ended on Spotlight. so and we're in the same room, in the same building, in the same town. But of course, the world outside, the world outside has changed. I think we've got about time for about an hour on Trump and Brexit, or not.
Now, silence.